So Dr. Mahmoud, welcome in our first webinar, and we're looking forward to hear you and to see and to watch your presentation.
Good afternoon, Egypt. It's Mahmoud from Washington. Okay. Right. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to have this discussion with you today. And I mean it to be a discussion, so I'll be super fast in going through the presentation. But I finished this presentation before I read this very interesting opinion piece that came out today in the Financial Times. And I ask you all, please, to have a look at it. It's signed by heads of state, including the Egyptian president and Chancellor Merkel, with a very good title relevant to our discussion today. Only victory in Africa can end the global pandemic. And it covers all of the aspects that I'll be discussing with you today. And it's a very timely piece because we are today in a very important week for the IFIs, the IMF, the World Bank. The G20 as well has its own meeting. Many of the institutions, including the IMF, they have their spring meeting as well. And I'm happy that this piece is coming, focusing on solutions rather than just talking about the problems. And with this very strong end of it, saying that the crisis has shown how interconnected we are all. No region can win the battle against COVID-19 alone. And they emphasize that this is not the time for division or politics, but for unity and cooperation. So what they are cooperating in, they are going to be cooperating in all of the things that we'll be highlighting today. Matters related to the response to the health crisis, issues related to the response to the recession, matters related to pushing away other crises that we don't really need now, like a debt crisis or a food security crisis. I'm happy to see this piece because when I see leaders and heads of state from all over the world, it's not just the German and Chancellor and the Egyptian president, but there are many others who joined them in signing this important piece as an open letter to the global community to act together, addressing the matter in very positive way, willing to provide support, saying, let's relax our differences and get things done. So let me put this all in a context with you now. Next slide, please. So I'm saying that we are in battles to flatten the curves. We have two curves that we have to flatten and to make them flat as soon as possible with whatever we can of ideas, regulations, common sense, cooperation between communities and authorities. We need to flatten the curves. So far, we don't really have a vaccine. There are many ideas about how to cure the disease, and we have seen many people who have been able to get decent treatment. There are different schools on how to deal with this, from Korea about its way of testing, tracing, and treating, to other countries that made a lockdown, but based on the guidelines of the WHO, we need to get this issue of health priority operationalized in a good way. And then I think people will start to be less panicky about matters when we see a good solution approved by the international health community as the best vaccine and the best cure for that. There have been some good news coming from different places. You saw China there, but as you can see, you saw as well improvements in Japan, in Singapore, in Korea with their flat curves, but other countries are still very much struggling. We saw as well the good example from Germany, but I would like to say, not as a health expert at all, just listening almost daily to the WHO guidelines, that we shouldn't really be compromising matters when it comes to health. And we have never seen it really an issue of a trade-off between the life and the well-being of the people. And I was very pleased to see that joint op-ed by the managing director of the IMF, Kristalina Georgieva, and Dr. Tedros of WHO, saying, well, the health of the people and the health of the economy should go hand in hand. There is no contradiction between the two. We need to prioritize right. Next, please. And by the way, I've never seen an economist worth his salt talking about this kind of a trade-off or compromising lives for the economy. You are ahead of me a bit. No.
Okay.
Let's go to recession, please.
Okay.
Don't press us. Thank you. We're talking about technology a lot. Sometimes technology is not helping us, like me trying to get in this call for a few minutes. Yeah, the second battle, if the first battle, as it should be, flattening the curves of cases affected by the virus, the other battle is another flattening of the curve, but in a different direction. We saw here the impact of recession. This is based on the latest economic outlook, just came yesterday from the IMF, thanks to my colleague Grami, who put these figures fast yesterday night on the slide, based on the projections of the IMF that are discussed today and tomorrow until the end of the week. You see the performance of the advanced economies in blue, emerging markets doing better slightly. The dip is not that deep, but we saw a recession in all elements of it, something that we haven't seen since the Great Depression. It is not depression, it's still a recession. We can still avoid being into a depression through good coordination of economic policies, through injection of stimulus funding, and through coordination between fiscal and monetary policies and partnerships with the private sector. If we are not doing that now, we are likely to see a deeper recession that could lead us to a depression with serious implications on incomes. Now we have 170 countries around the world with negative per capita income growth, 170. What was the case before the recession? Only it was estimated to have only 10 countries suffering from that. So we need really to deal with this issue as fast as possible. I know countries' capacities are different. In this country here, the US, they injected $2.3 trillion. This is equivalent to more than 10% of their GDP, with the help of the Federal Reserve Bank and the banking system. And the leverage, they put something like $400 billion plus in the budget. This could be leveraged by 10 times. So this will add another 4 trillion to the 2 trillion. So imagine fiscal and monetary support to the fiscal stimulus that could be equivalent to 30% of the economy. We only wish to be having all of that in the good times, but that will have really a great impact on people's lives. But it's just the cure that we need to pay attention to. Next, please. Yeah, so I said two battles: flatten the two curves of health cases affected by COVID-19, and the flattening of the recession curve. The other one that we need to avoid is having any kind like a food security crisis. Everybody who's in this business, including the leaders and the FAO, the international organization responsible for food and agriculture. Everybody who is an expert in this area, they are telling us we are not in 2008, 2009, and we are not in 2010, 2011. We don't really have a good reason to have a food security concern. We do not have an issue when it comes to food production. It's at best no weather hazards. Fuel prices are very low. So we are not in a similar situation to 2008, 2009, or 2010, 2011. Yes, we admit there are logistical problems, and I think the proposal that came from different people about having a green channel under health supervision that can secure food products, their imports and exports and trade is what we need to have. But we don't need to have this kind of crisis at all. We don't really have the fundamental reasons for it. Next, please. Yes, I think there was a slide about debt, which I like to talk about as well. Yeah. The other thing that we are trying to avoid, and I'm happy that the article in the Financial Times by the president is addressing this. We don't need really to have a debt crisis. Countries' priorities are basically for health, social protection, and dealing with the crisis. The African ministers of finance a couple of weeks ago, they said that they need $44 billion in terms of debt service allocated for this year to be postponed in payment. We have seen increase in debt during the past years. We are not learning from the mistakes of the past. And either you can see it from the year 2000 until yesterday, which we got it from until 2019 from the Peterson Institute. Excellent paper if you are interested in debt management proposals and standstill and how that will work, or from the recent IMF report that covers debt, and you can really see the different scenarios in the emerging markets and the advanced economies. We reached unprecedented levels of debt for government, private sector, and even the household sector, sometimes for good reasons and sometimes just encouraged by the low cost of borrowing. Now we are facing a problem, and that needs to be prioritized. We have different proposals, including the ones coming from IMF and World Bank for a moratorium. What could be considered really is a kind of a standstill, a debt relief, and perhaps a debt restructuring in kind of three-stage scenario. Happy to discuss this at length. I spent all of my life in government dealing with this issue of debt and its implications. I'm happy to deal with any question in this regard. Next, please. Yeah, well, I'm just sharing with you that for two reasons. If I'm starting with the crude oil, we saw oil prices above $60 a barrel at the beginning of the year. And then because of the crisis, we saw that touching $19 a barrel. And then even after the meeting with the OPEC plus unprecedented cut in production, we didn't see the market responding with the price increase. And this kind of decline and volatility is very much expected for many reasons. First, the demand side is very weak, and it will continue to be weak for a few months. And at the same time, there is a kind of a belief in the market, at least circles in the market, that this is not really the full truth about the whole situation. And they are testing the resilience of the agreement. But again, demand will make some kind of a change on this. We expect more volatility in this commodity market, not just in the oil one, but the rest of the commodity markets, indices that are there in your northeast of the chart. The financial markets, we have seen the sell-off. $100 billion went out from the emerging markets in a couple of weeks. The cure really is basically about fixing the real economy, fixing the health matters, make as much coordination that you can do to fix the demand and the supply for some of the commodities. But don't try to push anything in the market directly to impress the market. The market is responding to fundamental weaknesses, and that will be fixed when the fundamental weaknesses are going to be fixed. Next. Of course, there could be opportunities for governments or the private sector to buy at some stage, but let's not really rush into unsolicited advice. So I told you about the recession. Let's get into the economic indicators and what they really mean. If you compare the actual of growth in 2019, it was almost 3%. Or 2.9%. Projection by IMF for the global output is minus 3%. So this is more than 6 percentage points of a drop from the level that we are in last year, which was not really a very good year actually when it came to growth. Not everybody was happy with that year because we saw better years like 2018. Not super, but at least much better than 2019 when it comes to growth. When you see that reflected in particular economies, United States dropping from 1.7 to a projected minus 6, Euro area suffering more from 1.2 increase to minus 7.5. Germany, the production machine declined from positive growth of 0.6 to minus 7. The projections for 2021 are very optimistic, I would say, that there are going to be very strong recovery, not to get us into a kind of a V shape that is hoped for, but a kind of a recovery thanks to the stimulus and thanks to resumption of work based on these scenarios. Emerging markets from a positive 3.7 to a negative minus 1. China suffering 1.2. That is not really in the recorded history of China. We have never seen that even before the reforms of Deng Xiaoping. India, 1.9 projection, still positive, which is good. But again, this is not the strong growth of India. The super growth countries of the ASEAN from 5% to minus 0.6. Let's see the region. Next, please. Next, please. Middle East and Central Asia. Forgive the regional definition by the IMF here because Middle East and North Africa, Middle East has always different definitions. You go to any organization, they have their own definition. Some region, they add Central Asian countries to it, like Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan by the IMF. But let's focus on the individual countries in this. Saudi Arabia, 0.3%, very low growth last year, minus 2.3 with the impact of oil for this year, expected to bounce back at 3%. Same for United Arab Emirates, minus 3.5%, going back to positive 3.3%. Iraq is affected badly. These are the oil exporter countries. So let's see the oil importers. Well, here, I know that this could be subject to an interesting debate. Last year, 5.6%. This year, projection by the IMF, 2%. I know government of Egypt has its own higher projection than this. It could be for the methodological differences. But let's wait and see, because with simple training here, you need really to get not just the first hit impact. You need to check the second round effect of growth, and you need to net that all together. So I mean by that you might be realizing some positive gains from something, like Egypt as an oil importer can have the benefits for that. But again, because it is with very strong relations with many oil exporters, remittances, tourism, investments, other transfers, that could really be giving you a story different than this. So how can I solve this? Projections based on models, models based on assumptions, assumptions might be wrong. So please use more sectoral perspective to what you are trying to do now. Get this kind of aggregate growth. Rule of thumb, anything that could be projected positive last year, take from it 50% to 60%. We still have in Egypt growth in positive terms, which is better than negative, definitely. Not high enough for the per capita income to be seeing realized benefit from that. And when you see the kind of numbers of unemployed people, the people who are now supported by social protection measures, we need really to put that all into context. Let's discuss this, because I'm really looking forward to your points of views on this. I wished I have a chart somewhere about the revision of projections that I did for China. It's in a different presentation I did. If you check any week of projections by different institutions, Asian Development Bank, World Bank, IMF, investment banks, you will see the numbers all over the place, but they could be united in something on the trend. So now the trend is telling us the countries that are negative are going to be negative. The countries that are positive are going to be positive. Go to your experience, do a sectoral analysis, see your line of business, and then make the link to these assumptions. Happy to come back to that. Next, please. Yeah. One of the reasons I'm happy with this good article by the leaders, it's addressing all of what I'm talking about. So it will save me time. What I'm saying here, in order to get out from all of these crises that I've been mentioning, there are proposals, 1+9. And I meant really to have the health response as a unique one. Don't compromise the spending of health, on the spending of health. It's good that when I saw the figures for this year, that the budget of this year is putting 95.7 billion for health. This is close to 2% of the Egyptian GDP of last year. The budget, comparing it to the GDP of last year. So perhaps because of the crisis, you may need to expect more spending on the health side than this. So this is one. Health is doing a great job. I just wrote an article in Arabic about praising the brave doctors and nurses are doing everywhere around the world. They need support, not just financial support, but they need our acknowledgement and appreciation for their great work and sacrifices. But in addition to that, you need really to deal with other matters. And I employed the language of the SDGs to tell you that SDGs are part of the solution, the Sustainable Development Goals. One of the main things that we need really to remember, and I'm encouraging you to see this report. In September 2019, the former head of WHO and the Secretary General of the IFRC published a report with the support from the World Bank and the IMF is telling us that the health system is not prepared. And health is SDG 3. This is the third goal of sustainable development. So we need to continue supporting the health system. It's not a crisis, and that we need to go about it by negligence before it happens and panic when it happens. Please, we need to take the lesson. Health sector should be a winner coming out from this crisis. If you are in this line of business, you should be doing more investments in it. People from all aspects, from health insurance and the financial side, to financial support, to the equipments, to the devices, to the testing machines, to technology solutions, to taking care of the health units. This is a growing line of business. If you are in it, congratulations, because you will be getting more business in the future. Meanwhile, we need to invest in education. Digitalize. Great that I'm talking to the Chamber of partnerships between Germany leading in digitalization and Egypt, which has a great potential and very good brains in technology and especially in matters related to telecommunication digitalization. Then we need to focus as well on social protection schemes. I have been proposing, because of the implications of the fourth industrial revolution, the frictional unemployment that may happen, we need a new system for social protection. We need, I just finished a call with a good friend at the UNESCO, talking about change, disruption is going to be, and are actually, and sometimes we're just putting our heads in the sand. It's the name of the game. Disruptions, what I call in Arabic, murbikat, they have to be factored in our system. You need really to deal with all of these disruptions coming from nature or coming from fast technology or coming from demographic change, as if you are living in Japan or San Francisco dealing with earthquakes. It's a factor in life. So we need to build the resilience in the system with cushions to deal with that, including the social protection scheme. This is to end poverty, SDG 1, and to make your society, our society, more inclusive, SDG 10. We need to prioritize economic policy with partnerships with the private sector. You will be seeing lots of calls for the state to intervene. I really want the state to intervene more, but where? Infrastructure, digital infrastructure, public education, public health, decent transport system, decent networks that could connect people better. In partnership with private sector, that we need to leave the space for the private sector with its own comparative advantage to do what it is able to do more. We don't need to repeat the mistakes of the past. One of the areas of mistake when the state comes too much in areas related to the private sector, that is going to be at the expense of something else on its prioritization for education or health or social protection. If the state comes as a kind of an entrepreneur in an area of business that the private sector is more capable in and making losses, these losses are losses to the taxpayer, losses to the state, losses to its capacity to do a better job in education, health, and social protection. So we need really to be innovative here. The state is being called upon to intervene, but this state needs really to intervene where it really matters. And where are the areas that the private sector cannot do? Private sector cannot do a primary health care system. They cannot. They can provide perhaps the equipments, but they cannot really run the system. The private sector cannot really do some primary education in a remote village. But they can do all modern education, and German schools and German university is known of its quality. But this is not at the expense of other systems to be in place. I spent too much time on that, but I'm really concerned about different dynamics. We need to localize development and investment. Egypt, 27 governorates. I think every governorate needs really to have, especially the big ones. We have some governorates of a size of a small state or a small economy. Perhaps they need airports, more universities, schools, investment zones. In a country like Egypt, we cannot rely on 5 or 6 economic zones. We need really to localize all of these efforts. In the last year I was in government, I tried to establish more investment zones, but in coordination with the private sector in areas, actually they are still going to be open. I was aware of the one that I started in Mid Ghamr, in Banha, and the Saf. These are areas that could really benefit from the private sector involvement. The state provided the infrastructure, private sector need to do its miracle. We need to do more of that. Accelerate digitalization, I mentioned that. Pay attention to the losers, compensation, winners, good for them if they are doing the good job. There are many winners in decent way. And we need to really to combat any kind of profiteering from the crisis. And finally, we need to be aware of the fact coming from the Greeks that nothing is more permanent than the temporary. Sometimes in times of war, times of crises, you may impose some of the measures, but these measures may not really be relevant for the future. So we need to have some set provisions for some of these regulations. Meanwhile, can you please mute? Somebody's unmuted.
Please mute your microphone to avoid background noise.
Yeah. So here, when I say nothing is more permanent than the temporary, I mean some sort of temporary regulations. It's like the lockdown. The lockdown is, I hope it's a temporary arrangement. So that needs really to be taken out based on the health conditions. But there are other things that we might think that they could be temporary, but they will be with us. It's like technological solutions. Your good coordinator of events and activities, Karen, had been trying to get me to talk to you for almost 2 years now. I missed you in Egypt, but now I think this is a very good way to handle communication, education, training. There was a very good article. I encourage university leaders to have a look at it from a Harvard scholar yesterday about the new modality for education, mixing traditional way of education and blending it with technology. for the future. Think about it. Next, please. I have 2 minutes and then I'll be listening. So I touch upon what Egypt did. And this is just a cut and paste from Egypt's page on the IMF. They did that for all countries around the world. You can see Egypt consistent about the measures with the rest of the countries: fiscal, monetary, and macro financial. Spending 2% of GDP. When I was asked, yes, good start, because I saw other countries spending more than this. This kind of an increase of spending, the 2%, shouldn't really be reflecting one-to-one to budget deficit. You need to prioritize, and you need perhaps to do more partnerships with the private sector to deal with some of the impacts related to the response and recovery. Next, please. Yes. So I know after crisis, I've been always saying that after each crisis, and I'm proving at least more than half right, that crises have a revealing dynamic, have a creation dynamic, and have an acceleration dynamic. Always think of them that way, as all of the crises in the financial sector have revealed weaknesses of regulations, revealed dynamics of some more banks than others doing better than others, and creating new systems and new rules. This is unprecedented crisis. It's not just a small financial sector crisis here or there. It's a big shock to the system. So that it is testing the systems, it is accelerating some of the changes, and it is going to make a difference when it comes to creation of new orders within countries and globally, perhaps. Well, time will prove that anyway, but actually not one single shock will be responsible for these big changes, but it's coming with variety of other methods happening at the same time. So what to do when you have this? Remember what I told you about, that we need to live with this kind of disruption? What you need to do: invest in human capital, invest in resilience, and invest in infrastructure. I mentioned that before. So next, please. Invest in human capital means more investment in health, universal health coverage for all, technical skills need to be enhanced, early childhood education, and please, we need really to accelerate the universal health coverage in Egypt. I know that there is a program, but we cannot wait for many years now. Everybody needs really to have a health coverage supported by the state, connecting the units. The Egyptian presidency and leadership had proven that they can really beat the record of time when they need to do that. We have seen that in many infrastructure projects. This is an infrastructure and superstructure kind of a project that needs this kind of partnership. This is a golden opportunity to push for a universal health coverage for all Egyptians and all residents in Egypt. Next, please. Invest in resilience. Don't forget climate. Don't forget disasters. Don't forget the implications of technological change. So we need to have something similar to the universal basic income. I know every proposal had its opponents and proponents, but the social protection system, and the admirers of Bismarck, like myself, shouldn't really take that as an offense. Bismarck taught us how to have the Bismarckian model for social protection, based on paying your, getting your wage. Some of that will be cut for your retirement. Thanks, Mr. Bismarck. Now we are in a different world. We need that Bismarckian model, but mind you, many people do not really have the luxury of having this kind of steady salary. They don't even need it. And we have seen the people working in Uber, the entrepreneurs, the small and micro enterprise leaders. But in order for them to work, they need really a cushion. They need a protection. They need something decent salary that's not a substitute to education or health, but something to help them until they get a job. When they get a job, they will get the minimum wage, which should be above that universal basic income. Happy to discuss this. Next. Yeah, I mentioned that. Investment in infrastructure. We saw how Egypt took seriously, thanks to partnership with Germany, electricity solutions to network problems, infrastructure networks. But now we need to invest more on data, networks, and artificial intelligence. These are basically the DNA of the future. How to do that? You need policy. You need this very complicated chart. I can spend an hour explaining it. But if you take any kind of a disruption, you need to put it in a policy framework. You need to have the three investments I mentioned to you. You need to have the finance, you need to have the data, and you need to have effective implementation. Meanwhile, you need to work in the 4 levels of coordination: the global level, as we see it in health; regional coordination. The articles of the leader today was basically about the regional response in Africa; national, as we see it. But what is the new winner of this? Perhaps because I'm coming from a village in Egypt, I always have my local bias, but please, we need to focus more on the local work and the local community. And Germany has great examples of community-based work with great solutions in partnership there. I think this is my last slide. Thank you so much for your patience. Looking forward to your comments, and apologies for that 3-minute delay for the connection. Listening to you.
No, thank you, Dr. Thank you very much, Dr. Mahmoud, for the well-thought ideas and recommendations, and also comprehensive coverage of, as you mentioned, both crises, the economic one and the COVID-19 one. So I started already to receive questions, so I'll take them one by one. So first one, what is your advice for a small business given the current crisis, either the economic or the COVID-19?
Right. Okay. If you don't mind, just to take as many questions, because I tend to spend a lot of time in answering. So if you don't mind, take. So I took the first one. I took note of it. Thank you so much.
Okay. Then the other question, there were a lot of news over the social media around conspiracy theory, and that the government is taking aggressive or exaggerating to the response to the COVID-19. And there are again rumors that this is a part of a big plan to change economic and financial systems in the interest of some enterprise or global players.
Okay, nice.
Another one, how can we encourage the state, the developers, and the business community to support and implement sustainability standards, green architecture, well-being standards in the buildings?
Excellent.
And of course, highlighting also the importance of working from home, as it saved a lot of jobs in the current crisis.
Yep.
Another question, are we going to see, that's an important one, to see a release of reimbursement of the debt from World Bank and IMF, and maybe with a lower interest rate for countries like Egypt?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Next one, how do you see Egyptian pound performance on the short term?
Okay.
Another interesting one, who will benefit from the crisis?
Yes.
How likely is that the G20 will have an agreement to burn all debt, with China is the only one who has debt? What will be the situation for developing countries? So basically, it's about who winner and losers out of the crisis.
Right. Okay. Can I answer some of these?
So let's stop here and then.
Thanks.
Please. Yes.
Right. Yes. And that slide on the 1+9, I put that argument about winners, losers, and profiteers. So the winners are basically not just now, because in such crisis, nobody wins. Of course, there could be some activities that are still there, health supplies, food chains, agricultural products, basic logistical support, technology sector, making us all connected now. These are basically sectors that are seeing more demand than normal and more attention than normal. So if you assume that this crisis that we're in is going to be with us for a few months, so this is just for the moment. What will happen, my job is always about the future, development planning, 2030, all of these kind of benchmarks for the future. So it's basically who will be really winning in a sustainable way, in a steady manner, in the future. I see some of the current winners continue with us. The technology, solutions, those who develop applications, the service providers, those who manage working from home, systems to support that, security systems to support the networks. And here, this is the acceleration effect. Whatever we're assuming to happen in few years, now it is happening in few weeks under the pressure. So that is a kind of a winning sector. The health sector is another one, but this one relies on government and spending. So that needs partnerships with government. The third sector is any kind of an activity that you can do in a localized manner. That many of the ideas here that you need really to have your sector production close to the markets. And I was arguing the other day that Egypt had been always put in a negative context when it comes to population, demography, and population growth. And another negative context is more import than exports. Yeah, we import of something like 70 billion, we export $30 billion, so we always had this kind of huge gap. But I think you can really use that as a kind of a bargaining power. You are in business, see how realistic this assumption is. With the disruption of global value chain and the global supply chain, many of the exporters today would really like to see more diversity in the location, even at the expense of cost and efficiency. I know I had many, and I have many German friends. When it comes to cost and efficiency, they are always concerned. But sometimes, to be realistic and more pragmatic, sometimes you may relax some of the straitjacket assumptions about cost and efficiency for matters related to long-term management at a lower cost and bigger efficiency. So what you may compromise in the short term, you will gain in the long term. Nobody now wants to see a couple of machines and kitchens feeding and producing for the world and will be at the mercy of the global supply chain if something happens for any reason, a virus, terrorist attack, political tension. So I think countries like Egypt with 100 million people and growing, decent per capita income and was growing steadily, and good location, and many infra zones. Actually, I was invited for that meeting for the Suez zone before the crisis on the 4th of March. And actually, even before that, I was preparing a piece about using the home market as the main base for attraction. Egypt is not like the other zones around the world. Close market base, which is few minutes away from your production line. So I think that will be a possible winner. Losers are the ones who are losing their jobs. 200 million estimate of ILO, some of them will be coming back and will be coming back strongly, but there will be some frictional unemployment. The newly graduates may have less chances to get the job that they dream of in the location and the salary that they were hoping for. So there will be some sort of constraints in this area for some time. The profiteers, as we saw the war profiteers, we might see profiteers from people cheaply trying to get more profits for hoarding some essential supplies, including some medical supplies. That needs to be dealt with through competition policy, anti-monopolistic measures, and the state. That question. Well, so far the focus is on low-income countries. Middle-income countries like Egypt do not really have any kind of a special clause so far, either by the G20 or the IFIs. This may change after the spring meetings. I saw very strong language from middle-income countries, from Latin America and Africa, that they need really to have some sort of a good understanding of the problems. They don't really like to be declared as defaulting. They are concerned about rating as well, but there are priorities. And that's why the ministers of finance of Africa, including the low-income and the middle-income countries, have asked for this kind of a standstill or a moratorium. We'll see how it works. Many decent proposals in a positive way have been put. We need to see how the reaction is going to be. The problem today in the debt, it is not like in the past. Your creditors today are not the official sovereign creditors, the Paris Club members, bilateral or multilateral. There are many private sector creditors, the Eurobond holders, for instance, private sector. And some of those Eurobond holders could be your own nationals and your own institutions. So we need really to be careful about matters here. Of course, in the non-Paris Club membership, in the non-Paris Club creditors, there are others like China, for instance, and they need really to have a kind of a well-coordinated way for handling matters. I'm looking forward to the G20 communique that will come out from the meeting tomorrow, and we'll see how it will work. Working from home, yes, this could be a new model of doing things. I was just thinking myself, for a person who spent the last 10 years traveling 300 days a year, 300 days a year. This is based on my log at the World Bank. How many meetings I could have done if we have this kind of technology while I'm still in my office? This will have a change in the future. Not substituting every meeting, because the human to human kind of direct communication is needed, but this is not a substitute, not a full substitute, but it is a kind of an alternative, and this is what's keeping us up and running. Sustainability, I wish that I have another opportunity to talk about how the impact investing world is changing. And yesterday I was in a discussion with a rating agency and about the future of impact. How can you embrace environment, social, and governance, how to measure them better? People will be much more concerned about their health, about their environment, more than what we think. I know that some people will play games and try to be free riders, but society is going to be very much careful about those who can spoil their lives and exploit their health or social lives or environment and climate in the future. Then about the SMEs. Well, I think in terms of the flexibility of the SMEs, they enjoy more flexibility than others, but they have more vulnerability than others as well. And I'm happy that the government has put some measures to support the small and medium enterprises. Around the world, you have seen the budget of the United States. They put a few $100 billion for direct and indirect support to the SMEs and their workers. I think linking the taxes to the protection of jobs are fine. Hard to implement, I know, especially in an economy that has a great deal of informality, even within the formal sector. So it's not just 100% informal arrangements you have. But I think that could be a good start of better registration in the system, being part of these kind of insurance systems, universal basic income, paying attention to being part of the social security and the tax system at large. This will change, but in the short term, I think, well, compensation is compensation. It doesn't really cover every loss. And I'm afraid, as was portrayed in The Economist the other day, what we are in is like having very strong waves. Through these waves, unfortunately, some companies will sink, some companies will float, and some companies will surf high. So it's basically about the agility and the capacity to adapt. Yes, foreign exchange, this is the last question, I think. We are in a position today that every country had declared a kind of a system or an arrangement for exchange rate policy, and management needs to honor the system. There's not the time to change your system. If you are a fixed exchange rate system, like the countries in the Gulf, protect it, honor it, spend more of your international reserves. If your exchange rate system is declared to be flexible, it has to show the flexibility. No panic, no rush, but no rigidity at the same time. It depends really on the kind of demand that we are seeing, genuine demand. There are always speculative demand. But you have been hit in in the foreign exchange receivables in some of the key sectors, but your spending in imports and travel had been constrained as well. So, and the central bank has managed the exchange rate system well after the reforms. We'll see this kind of credibility that they had is going to be a main pillar. It is not about your reserves. It's not about your announcements. It's the credibility of the system that will keep people under good circumstances when they foresee or forecast for the future.
Good, thank you. So maybe a couple of comments from my side. I can only second your opinion on the working from home, and I see that it will have an impact at least on the travel, on the business travels or the business trips, because the experience has taught us, or the crisis has taught us, that not for every meeting we need to travel and do business trips. So that's definitely, there is a major impact, and see corporate will save a lot of money adopting virtual meetings and the likes. The second one is the global SCM, and where I see Egypt can play a role, especially the impact from India and China, where most of the supply chains were focused. So Egypt should have or can play a role here to attract manufacturing and others offshore and other services for company and corporate to diversify their supply chain. So let's take the next wave of questions. So countries in conflicted areas like Syria, Yemen, Libya, and Venezuela, where the health services are really at very low level. And how do you see the responses of let's say, top of big countries in order to prevent a second wave or a spike in those countries that could affect the other countries that have recovered already? Then, yes, another question on the airline business and their broken business model. How do you see it? Broken business model of airline business at large. And another interesting one, will the US dollar remain a universal currency? Seeing the trials or the done by Russia and China, they're trying now to do export and import or trade at large using their own currencies and not anymore based on US dollar.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. I'm conscious to your time as well. So 3 minutes remaining. So I'll be super fast and
okay.
to provide a follow-up discussion. I really enjoyed your questions, and I respect and admire your work and your partnership. So I hope to have another opportunity as a follow-up as well. So
sure.
In countries in conflict, yes, it's a very important question. That's why the Secretary General of the UN first announcement is basically ceasefire now. Of course, this is a kind of a common sense. It's a kind of moralistic perspective. It's the right thing to do to stop war and conflicts. But unfortunately, as we saw even in peaceful countries like Egypt, terrorist attacks or planning for terrorist attacks never stop, even when we are all under this kind of trouble. So we need, while we are hoping for the better, we need to be prepared for the worst. And there is a special attention being provided for the support, the socio-economic support for fragile and post-conflict countries. And the humanitarian system led or coordinated by OTSA, UNHCR, and others are doing a great job. There is an appeal as well for financial and in-kind support for the work. So please, through your contact, please try to help them as much as you can. Airlines, so the package of $75 billion in the case of the US being approved. There is going to be a hit, there is going to be a loss, and there will need to be a kind of burden sharing, especially for the privately owned networks and companies. The ones that are 100% owned, all of us bear the cost. They will make losses. taxpayers, the citizens of the country, will pay for them to survive. There will be some changes as well in the system, because I don't think that travel will be the same. Regulations for safety, many questions that your manager will ask you, or you as a manager will ask your colleagues, do you really need to go to this thing, or you can just Zoom and do a meeting via WebEx or something. Luxury business of travel, question marks. Future of tourism, we need really to wait and see, especially with these kind of things, not just the difficulty of travel, but basically of the unemployment and income and all of that. I know that the tourism sectors around the world have shown more resilience than other sectors, but this one, they need to be innovative. And in Egypt, there is a very sophisticated network of private and government agents working in this area, but we need to be prepared. The final question about foreign exchange, dollar, and all of that. As I said, these kind of crises do test the capacity of systems, including the foreign exchange system globally. And at one stage, before the First World War and between the two wars, the sterling was the main currency for settling trade and cross-border transactions, and it failed the test. That's why some currencies it survived for a while, but then failed. And the students of history of monetary systems know the dance between the sterling, the gold, and return to the gold, and all of this kind of discussion. The dollar had been in place for quite some time now. As far as the Federal Reserve System honors its obligations, and that's why we saw those swap arrangements that have been conducted with a dozen of central banks around the world, to show the support of the Federal Reserve System to the dollar. The issue of the alternatives had been always there. I'm talking to the German Egyptian chamber or the Egyptian German. So the issues of the euro as a substitute had been, or at least partially, had been discussed for. Issues related to volatility is a big question. When it comes to the renminbi or the yuan, around Shanghai, there is that organization for cooperation of Shanghai, which had been agreeing with each other as members, many countries, including China, India, Russia, many other countries, and that neighborhood as well, about settling their trade balances with their own national currency, some sort of arrangements for that. And we just had a meeting a few weeks ago. We'll see how that is going to be progressing going forward.
Okay.
The very final question about, I didn't answer it. I forgot it, but it could be a happy, interesting end, I hope, about conspiracy theories. I think the world is full of conspiracies, real ones. So we don't really need to go for conspiracy theories. Sometimes people will say, well, who's benefiting from that? So this should be behind it as a conspirator or something. I know conspiracy theories had many admirers. It's more entertaining than the dull facts. I'm afraid when it comes to my business, I always like the facts and the evidence as much as I get them. If I don't get them, I don't like to get into speculation for conspiracy theory, but because it doesn't really help us getting any of the measures that I mentioned. It's basically about evidence-based, and try to have alternative scenarios in a very much fast-changing world full of challenges. Very grateful to your time, very grateful to your question. Many thanks to Karen, many thanks to you all, and of course, to the chair. And God bless you all. And safety is #1 priority. So we need really to get together, follow the rules, be safe.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Mahmoud. Hopefully we can see you in another webinar soon.
Inshallah. Thank you so much. Very grateful.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you all for your time, and I wish you a nice evening. And we will send you a questionnaire, so please awaiting your answer to the questionnaire. Thank you very much.
Thank you.